So joining me now is Robert Padovano, a veteran criminal defense attorney who's been involved in many cases that I've covered over the years. Robert, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background and your career.
Well, I have been practicing in criminal defense exclusively for it's coming up on 34 years. I started out in Wake County and for about 22, 23 years. And then I moved over to Johnston County and have not been back to Wake County since, I guess, 2015.
And the reason you moved was because your wife was elected the district attorney of that county. And obviously
That
you can't, it would be difficult to practice criminal law in a county where your wife was the DA.
That's correct. There's a built-in conflict of interest, and the state was, of course, willing to make accommodations, but it was going to be pretty burdensome for the state. And I said, I am more than happy to go over to Johnston County and restart over there, and I've loved every minute of it since I've moved over here.
Gotcha. Now, this was a Wake County case.
It was.
And, the details of this case are pretty dramatic, but I think it starts with the fact that you have four defendants and they're all under the age of 18. So these were all teenagers. How did you at first get involved in representing Ryan Hare?
The public defender at the time was Brian Collins, and he appointed me to the case since my client Ryan was under the age of 18 at the date of offense. It could not be considered for the death penalty. It was not a capital case, so the capital defender was not going to be involved. It fell to the Wake County public defender, and I was not in that office, but private attorney who was on a conflicts list. And since they had four co-defendants, they sent out the cases, and I was assigned to Ryan.
So, when you have four defendants, obviously there's always a chance that somebody's going to turn state's evidence, take a plea deal, and testify. You didn't know, though, that all of those three other defendants, right, were going to do that. We're going to take a plea deal to testify against Ryan Hare. And that you learned really just at a check-in hearing for the trial.
That's right. That's right. At first, we're looking at four defendants sitting side by side going to trial. And came to light, it took several months for us to get police reports and discovery and the videos, but it came to light that my client's three co-defendants all made confessions. And my client never did. He was intensely loyal to his friends. He didn't say a word. And as it turns out, he really saved his friends by doing that, because at one point I was told, had Ryan confessed, then all four were going to go to trial for first-degree murder. Nobody was going to get a deal.
So they get a deal to testify against your client. How do you even build the case in this situation? Because it's a pretty dramatic case with some pretty disturbing details about how the victim died, with the asphyxiation, with the intake of drugs and alcohol. So what was your strategy?
That's a great question, because I could say we were going right up to the start date, and we didn't really know what our defense was, because the way the case had been packaged was that this was an assisted suicide kind of case where the victim wanted to die and that his friends were just helping him out. And it didn't really add up to me or to anyone in the courthouse crowd that was what happened. But that's the way the kids kind of painted it. And of course, at trial, when everyone got around to testifying, it did come out differently. So it was tough to build a defense.
Yeah. And so I guess really as a defense attorney, especially an appointed defense attorney, all you can do is try to limit the culpability of your client. And in this case, you do that by trying to take these other three people and saying, wait a minute, he was not the only person involved in this. There were these other three people, and they're throwing him under the bus. They're calling him the ringleader. Talk a little bit about that. And specifically, he had been involved off again, on again with the only female defendant in the case. And that played into everything. I mean, the prosecution said there was jealousy about her friendship with the victim, and that's what caused this to happen.
Well, that's how it started. The victim and the girlfriend, Allegra, they had this friendship, and that's what started all of this in motion. But as far as using that as a defense, you're right. We tried to make the jury see that all four of these kids are involved in the same behavior. But the other three are getting a deal because they agreed to talk. And why should we hold this person, the fourth wheel, to a higher standard? Why does he get life in prison and the others get 35 to 40 years? And that's basically all we had to go on. As the co-defendants testified, once they got into the jail, and they remained in jail for a while, before, I think it was 2 years before we got to trial. One of the co-defendants had gotten into a relationship with Allegra. They were dating. She was in love with him, and I think by the time we went to trial, that relationship was over, and she moved on to somebody else. She had multiple fiancés in her time at the county jail, and that was testified to. It was a crazy situation.
And you also had to deal with this kind of narrative that was out there really early on in the case because of these details that were in the search warrant, that were in the affidavit, that this was a satanic ritual. This was something to do with the occult. This was, a sacrifice of a human being. And none of that really turned out to be true, but it was out there, and it certainly had an effect, I'm sure, on the public. And I'm sure you were concerned that it might seep into the jury pool and they might hear this information.
Yes, we had to, ask any potential jurors what they have heard about the case. And most of the cases that I've tried, low-level drug cases or some drug trafficking cases to that point, not cases that made the news. This one was all over the news, and there were so many stories. The News and Observer reported that the kids were devotees of the insane clown posse that were known as juggalos. Learned that word for the first time, and that had nothing to do with anything. One of the co-defendants, happened to like some of their songs, and next thing you know, the NNO has a story on that was the driving force behind what happened. And it wasn't. But yes, we had to interview all the potential jurors as to what they knew, what they thought.
It was complicated, yeah.
And there was none of that involved.
I mean, and without violating any attorney-client privilege, what was your take on this? I mean, it was really unusual for people of this age to be involved in something like this, that was violent, seemed to be premeditated. It was really, I think, hard for people who were just looking at it, from an outside perspective to understand.
It made no sense. These kids they were nice kids. Sitting in a room with them, just normal, easy to talk to. You would never guess they would do anything illegal, let alone be part of a murder and a conspiracy. So it was pretty shocking. You would never guess just having to sit down with one.
And as a defense attorney, I mean, you've probably seen a lot of things. I know I did as a journalist, still do. How does this rank in your mind as one of the more unusual or bizarre cases that you've ever handled?
Well, it's the one that everyone asks me about. HDTV, Discovery HD or whatever, did a story on it, a docudrama that sensationalized it. Um, I've been interviewed several times over the years. It still captivates the imagination because I think mostly because it was Apex, an area that had relatively no crime. And then this, 4 kids from the high school killing one of their friends. It shook the whole community.
Yeah, and I mean, for people who are listening to this from somewhere else, Apex is really, it used to be a rural community. Then it turned into a suburban bedroom community to Raleigh, which is, the city, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And their slogan, I think, is the peak of good living. It's just not a place that you would ever expect to have something like this happen.
They don't get a lot of murders in Apex, North Carolina.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and did it, I mean, have you since that time, have you taken appointments off of the public defenders list and represented people, or did this sour you, or did it embolden you to think, okay, if I can handle a complex case like this, I could do other cases like this?
Oh, I'm still doing court appointed work. Yes, I think every criminal attorney should. There's a shortage, and public defenders' offices are overwhelmed. But so yeah, as long as I'm practicing, I'll do court appointed.
Is there a lesson here? Anything to be learned, a morality lesson? I mean, even if it's just like, don't go along with what other people think is cool or think you should do if you know it's wrong. I mean, obviously, you had 4 young people who, really, like you said, didn't have a record of getting in trouble, and here they are involved in a violent crime.
Well, I think that's obvious. You don't go along with the crowd if it seems like it's the wrong thing. But it's easy to say that once you get into a situation, everybody's different. Every situation's different. Sometimes you feel like there's no other way. There's no way out. And I know these kids were convinced that some there was some shadowy organized crime guy who was threatening to kill them if they hadn't killed Matthew. And at that age, fear plays a big part. They're just teenagers and they were easily convinced of things that just weren't happening. So it's hard to say, yeah, hey, always do the right thing.
Doesn't always happen.
It's situational. It is.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, thank you so much for sharing your recollection of this really unusual case. I appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you.